All right, everyone, let's get started. So my name is Daniel Westland. I am the GA for student engagement in the grad school. Thank you all for joining us for the Zoom meeting and the Zoom workshop. I just want to quickly go over some tips while we're in this meeting. Please keep yourselves muted unless the presenter asks for people to unmute. Second, if you have any questions or you want to respond to questions that were posed during the discussion, please answer them in the chat unless told to do otherwise. Also, you can privately chat with me or the presenter if you wish to share a question anonymously, or if you have any technical difficulties, just contact me individually. And then I just want to thank you all for your time. And I'm going to do a quick introduction. So today we're discussing student research and the grant process and managing budget and all that stuff. And our presenters will go further into that. So I will let them introduce themselves and we'll go from there. Have a great time. And if you have any questions, feel free to chat with me.
There we are. Okay, so I will let you guys know that this is our first Zoom experience. So if at any our screen or you can't hear us, just hit Daniel in the chat with a little SOS and we'll try to get it sorted for you, but we think it's set up well, so hopefully no problems. Your presenters today, I am Chira Mathis, Associate Director of Sponsored Programs in the Office of Research and Sponsored Programs.
And I am Nicole Morse. I am the Research Compliance Manager, also in the Office of Sponsored Program Research. Sorry, we just changed our names. Office of Research and Sponsored Programs.
It's a mouthful. So, okay. So as Daniel mentioned, there's a few elements to proposing and managing your projects through the Office of Research and Sponsored Programs. And so primarily what sponsored programs means, we'll start there with an operational definition, is any type of project or program that is funded by some outside source. So that's what sponsored means, right? But the principles that we're talking about will actually apply to really any research or other kind of project you want to do on campus that has compliance concerns. So I just want to be clear about that, that even if you're not getting funding from an outside source, Nicole Morse would be an excellent resource. For example, if you're doing survey research, you know, in your group, and it doesn't have funding from the outside, you're still possibly going to have some concerns with human subjects research. And so this will apply across all kinds of research projects you're doing, regardless of how they're funded. So they're sort of our ground notes. Okay, so if anybody attended this session here, we revamped it with a few extra bits of information based on attendee feedback. So two new things that we're going to cover in here, and I think we'll have enough time, will be how you even find funding. So we sort of started last year on how you engage with our office, but there's some pre-work that comes with that so that you can actually find the funding sources that might fit the kind of project you're doing. And then we also added in some more information around budgeting components because we heard that was a little bit confusing for students as well. So I like to think I have a good sense of humor. So this is one of my favorite cartoons about the fact that people don't think there's any funding out there for research, but there is. You just have to know where to look to find it. So one of the great things about being at UNC is that you've got access from any UNC IP address to this funding database called the Sponsored Programs Information Network, or SPIN, because higher ed loves acronyms. So we've thrown a link on these on the slide deck for you, and I'm sure that Daniel will circulate this after the fact so you can click through easily and find it. But what this does, this database houses tens of thousands of funding opportunities from literally across the world. So anything that you could think you might need funding for, this is going to have it from federal sources, international sources, state and local, foundations, corporate entities, could be things for dissertation research, could be bench science, could be really anything. So you've got access to this without having to create an account or anything. You just click the link here on this slide, and you'll have access to it. However, there are some benefits to creating a personal account. And the main draw of that would be that you can save your searches so that you're not starting from scratch every single time. There are a lot of filters in here that you can use to narrow down those tens of thousands into just handfuls. So obviously, if you're a student, the pool of things that you can apply for is going to be a little bit more limited than if you're a tenure track faculty member. So you don't want to have the search results, you don't want to put in sort of a broad keyword, and then it's going to show you everything, that you could apply for if you're a faculty member in Europe, because that's not going to apply to you. So I'm going to walk through the next couple slides, just an overview of how you adjust those filters, make your search results relevant, and then show you how you can save those searches and save some email alerts for yourself. So in your settings, once you've got an account set up, and let me back up first. So once you go to that SPIN website, there's going to be a little button that create an account, a user account, or request a user account. What happens then is the system pings me in the Office of Research and Sponsored Programs to approve you as a UNC user, and then you'll be prompted to set a password and you'll have full access to all of this. So it's really just 2 or 3 bits of information, first name, last name, email, and it's really easy to get yourself set up in there. So in your settings, you'll have a little category filters box, and you can click edit in there. And then across the top, you'll see several different options for how you can filter results. And so the examples that I'm going to show you here are project type. Often students are looking for funding to support something that's going to go into a capstone, dissertation, final project, whatever that might look like. So you can scroll all these on the left side, all the different options, and then click the little blue arrow there in the middle to either add or remove that from your list of restrictions. Same goes for applicant type. So if you're a master's student or a doc student, you can narrow down to your status as an applicant to limit those results as well. Okay, so once you've got all your filters sorted properly, back on your main screen, once you do start these searches, when you get your results, you can click up there in the right-hand corner the Save button. It's going to bring this pop-up. You can name your search, and then if you also choose, you can have the system send you email updates, and then you can set that, I believe, to weekly or monthly, which is a really nice passive way to be looking for funding while you're juggling all the other things about being a student. So, you might not have 6 hours you want to sit down and dedicate to through search results. But if you set this up, then you've already narrowed your parameters, you're getting way more targeted results, and you're getting them every week into your email. And so what I like to do is this fun little trick in Outlook that most people probably know about, but just in case, I'm going to throw the link resource up here to show you how to set rules in Outlook so that you can have these search results just go to a side folder for you to check out whenever you have time. This way they don't get buried, you're not overlooking them, accidentally deleting them. So this is just kind of a organizational tip that I find works really well, especially if you're going to be setting up multiple different searches, and you might have a ton of these results coming into you, or high frequency, that way it's just not getting bogged down in your main box. You can throw it to a dedicated folder where you can get to it later for at-a-glance checking. Okay, so once you get your search results, what is it you're actually looking for? So these are some of the high-level things that you're going to want to check out to make sure that it's something that's worth your time and that you actually are eligible for. And I'll give you a few screenshot examples on the next slide, but the biggest thing is going to be the eligibility. So some sponsors might be looking to fund you as an individual. They might be looking to fund the institution, so they want the money to go to UNC, but then you get to utilize it through the institution. And some might require a certain institutional status. So this is sometimes the case with foundation funding. They might be looking to only give money to another 501c3 designated entity. don't let that scare you. Sometimes when you see that in eligibility, what the sponsor really means is they just want a nonprofit to receive the money, which UNC is. We're just not that kind of nonprofit. So if you ever have a question about that, about institutional status, reach out to our office. We can help navigate some of that and maybe conversation with the sponsor to see what it is that they're really looking for. Because often being a public state institution, they think, oh yeah, you're fine. And so we've gotten through a lot of those red tape things before, so don't let it be a limiting factor. For the type of fit for the program, so obviously if the sponsor's website says that they fund secondary data analysis and the whole scope of your project is to actually go out and do field work, they're not going to fund what you're wanting to do. And so you need to read carefully to make sure that the scope of what you're trying to do is something that sponsor actually funds. Often close enough is not good enough in the sponsored programs world. It's got to be a pretty airtight fit in terms of the type of the project. Then you'll want to get your budgetary needs. And you're welcome to reach out to our office to kind of brainstorm that, because especially if it's the first time that you're proposing something, you might not know all the costs that are kind of the hidden things that you might not think of. And sponsors may have a cap on how much you can request. Often with student awards, it might be a few $1,000s, and maybe you need 10,000, but they might only be offering 2,000. And so we might have to have a discussion on sort of what things you could remove from your budget, or institutional sources through your unit, your faculty advisor, how you're going to make up the difference there to get your project done. A sponsor might also have limits on what they consider to be allowable. So it might be that you find an opportunity that is specifically for travel support for grad students. It might be they expect you to do a research project and what they're funding is your dissemination effort. So it might be that you get 2 grants to actually travel somewhere to go present findings. Now, obviously, that's one sliver of a project cost. And so, you might need to find additional sources to fund the actual work itself before you get to that travel point. But the underlying message here is just this: pay attention to what the funding opportunity says are the allowable costs, because you're not going to want to propose something that they expressly do not fund. Sometimes that might be that they don't allow any stipends for you or others, they don't allow equipment, or they don't want you to travel. So you're going to want to not include those things in a proposal to that agency, or to that particular program at least. And then you want to be mindful of timeline constraints and any preferences. And so you might find an opportunity that has a deadline in 4 days. That's going to be a no-go, because there are a lot of internal checks and approvals and discussions that need to happen before we get a proposal done and dusted and ready to go to the outside world. So the sponsor's proposal deadline is one thing, and then also often the sponsor will let you know the soonest start date. So if you're trying to graduate and you need to have a research project done by, let's say, May 2019, and a sponsor says the earliest start date for these awards would be October of 2019, that's not going to work for you, because you won't find out if you're funded until you're already supposed to be done. So you just need to be mindful of those timeline constraints given your particular needs. Okay, so a couple screenshot examples, and I threw these in here so you guys would have them in the deck to refer back to, but these are the kind, I just highlighted the kind of areas that you're gonna wanna look for some of these considerations. You'll see for this particular sponsor and program, it's specifically for doc students, and the project must include analysis of data. So obviously if that's not you, this won't be a funding opportunity for you. Similarly, the second example, there's a specific timeline for when the applicant has to have completed pre-dissertation requirements, the subject matter of the type of research that the student is proposing to do, and how long the project can be, and how much money is up for grabs. And so this is the kind of stuff that you're going to want to dig out of a request for proposals or a funding opportunity announcement. And again, if you run into questions, concerns, you're completely lost when you see one of these, again, reach out to our office and we're happy to walk you through one to get you a little bit more familiar and help you call out the things that are important in these announcements. Okay, so let's say that you have successfully used SPIN and found yourself a good funding opportunity that you do want to go after. This is a high-level view of the process of working with our office. And I'm going to go into each one of these in more detail, but let's cover the high-level stuff first. So the first step is an internal notice of intent process. And I've thrown the web link in there. And what this does is send out an email to your unit and college leaders and to our office that you have something cooking. So you're going to put in very high-level information. What's the funding opportunity? Who are you? Generally, what do you think your budget total is going to be? Are there any special considerations? And this is just 4 fields on the web. It doesn't go anywhere except internal, so it's not going to the prospective sponsor or anything like that. It's not set in stone, but it's the early heads up that we're going to have something in progress here from your unit, from you, so that we can plan and so that we can reach out to who we need to reach out to start talking about that proposal preparation timeline. Next step, once we get through working with you on the budget and ironing out any sort of compliance questions, and we get to the stage where we're ready to really have everybody review and approve the proposal, we're going to circulate something called a proposal review and endorsement form, which I'll show you on the next slide. It has to be signed by you as a student, your faculty, your chair, your college, and ultimately comes back to us in research and sponsored programs. And the purpose of this is really to make sure we're on the same page about what you're requesting and why, because what we'd hate to happen is for us to help you submit a proposal, you get funded, hooray, except then your unit and college didn't know about it and they don't want you working on it, or it doesn't fit in with your coursework, or, for whatever other myriad of reasons that it might not be supported. We want to make sure that we've got everybody's buy-in and awareness and approval ahead of the game. For student projects only, you really only have to complete this review and form 1 time per project unless your overall budget or scope changes. Now, the rationale behind this is, like I said, it might be that for student projects, only a portion of the project is able to be funded by a certain source. So it might be that you have 3 different funding sources to support one project. Maybe you were able to get $1,000 from a local association and another $1,500 from some national organization, and it's all the same project, but you just happen to have multiple on that project. We're not going to put you through the ringer to have to redo a pref every single time you're getting more money for the same project. So we streamline that a little bit to take the burden off of the students and encourage you guys to come through our office and get that support. So the last bullet in that pref section is FCOI, which stands for Financial Conflict of Interest. And these need to be completed for each proposal. So unlike the pref that you do 1 per project, for every sponsor you're going after, you'll need to disclose if you have a financial conflict of interest with that group. And the template for that we'll explain in detail about what exactly constitutes a conflict to be mitigated, and we'll go into that a bit more on another slide. So in between that prep stage, once we've got all that sorted, it'll get submitted to the sponsor, and if you get funded, then you come back to our office and we help you get established. So if the award is made specifically to UNC or the UNC Foundation, which might depend on who the sponsor wants that money to go to, where it should rest, we will either help set up a dedicated fund through our central accounting office, also referred to as a SOAP. So the reason we might segregate it is if the sponsor really wants you to account for the funds separately, if we have to return any funds at the end of the project, if there's financial reporting. But often with student awards, they're loose enough that the sponsor will give you the funding and then really just want a technical report at the end. So if it's not really that restrictive, what we'll do is we'll add the funds to your college's dedicated small student award fund and assign your project an activity code. This is really just informational. You don't have to make a decision on this. Our office will figure it out and let you know, your faculty advisor know, and your unit admin know where you're supposed to charge things for your project. Okay, so going back to notice of intent, for student projects, you'll want to put your name as the principal investigator on this one, just so we know it's a student project. And then in the co-principal investigators section, you'll want to name your faculty advisor, because we're going to want them to be in the loop the whole way through the process. And I know it can get a little confusing for student projects on this, just because this form is primarily for our faculty to complete for their proposals. So we just have to make sure we're getting the right names in the right spots, so that we know what your intentions are. On this particular form, if we had your faculty member and principal investigator, we would assume it's their project, and that you're sort of as the student other project personnel. So that's why we're asking you to complete it this way in the notice of intent stage. So keep this slide handy so that you can refer back to exactly where to put your name versus the advisor on our various internal forms, because it does vary by the type of form that we're talking about. And just a side note here, for our internal purposes, the faculty advisor is always going to be the person ultimately responsible for the project. So if you overspend your budget, if you have compliance issues, that's gonna reflect poorly on your faculty member. So you want to make sure that you're keeping good oversight of your project and working very closely with your faculty member, because they're really going on the hook for you. Okay, so a little bit about budgeting. There are two main categories of costs when you're talking about a sponsored project. So your direct costs are going to be the costs that specifically for your project, and you can't do your project without getting these things purchased or charged. So examples of those would be stipends. So do you need to pay yourself for this work, or do you need to engage others on campus and pay them? What materials and supplies do you need? So this could be obviously very dependent on your discipline. So, if you're doing survey research, maybe your supplies are phone lines and you need to use, printed materials to mail things out. Whereas if you're in bench science, maybe you need beakers and reaction chemical things that are not in my wheelhouse. But your faculty member should be able to help advise you on the types of materials and supplies you would need for your type of project. So definitely utilize their expertise. You might need equipment. You might need software licenses or technology. And what I always advise people to do with the software and technology line, to reach out to IM&T, because we might have things across campus that you don't know exist, that you might already have access to being a UNC student. So, statistical software, MATLAB, stuff like that. We might already have, an overarching license that you can leverage without having to have that cost in your own budget. It might be something you've already got. So check with your faculty member, check with IT before you put those things in a budget. For travel costs, you might have something where you need to do field work. So you can charge things like mileage to a sponsor. So if you're using your personal vehicle and you're driving down to Denver to interview people, or you've got to go dig something up in the Rocky Mountains, we can help you cost exactly what's allowable for that. So mileage, or maybe you're renting a vehicle, you don't have to shoulder those costs yourself as an individual. Or perhaps at the end of the project, it's going to be really important for you to go present at a conference. We can help you build out those kind of costs. So your per diem, your hotel, your registration fees, printing the poster. If you haven't gone through that before, outside of a project, we're certainly happy to help you guesstimate what a reasonable budget would be for those activities. And then maybe you need contracts with external consultants. So maybe there's some expertise at another institution you need to leverage. Maybe there's some agency or company in the state that you're working with that has a fee for you to access data or their population or something like that. Have a conversation with us and we'll help you figure out where to put that in your budget. Now, I did make a little note here that the little star next to certain items here means that item may require quotes or bids depending on the dollar level. So there are sponsor rules, and then there are also our state procurement rules that UNC has adopted in order to ensure fair competition on the things that we purchase. So an example of that would be if you have some equipment that's going to cost, I mean, not likely on a student project, but $100,000. We don't get to just say, you know, I really like Sigma Aldrich for that, and I'm just going to go ahead and give them my business. So, you know, the process here is going to stop you and say, okay, we actually need to put this out for a formal bid so that we can make sure the price you're getting is the most competitive, makes the most sense. So we don't just choose our vendors unless it's under a certain dollar threshold, and that will depend on if it's goods or services. And those things are set, like I said, in the purchasing and office. So you can head to their website if you want to dig into those dollar thresholds and sort of the requirements for those quotes. Otherwise, you can always reach out to our office and we'll help you out with those. Generally with student projects, we don't see things of the dollar level that would require it, but I like to put it in here just to manage expectations. Okay, so the second bucket of costs are going to be indirect costs. And so this, you don't have to, these are costs that do require, that are required for the project to happen, but aren't actually directly linked to your project. And so another word for indirect costs are facilities and administration costs. So that's us keeping the lights on, running the heat, you know, having a copier in your unit. These are institutional level things that UNC puts in place to facilitate research projects, but that you're not charging directly to your project because they're sort of incidental costs. And so the way that we budget those is through a federally negotiated process where central accounting has to propose to the government exactly what percentage of our costs fall into that bucket. And so the percentage that we've got for the current fiscal year is 38%. And so our office will be responsible for helping you apply that into your budget. We don't charge the indirect costs on top of everything. So we do exclude equipment, scholarships, and a couple other things that we don't really see in student projects like portions of subawards, rental costs. But often we see that student awards do not allow indirect costs. And if that's the case, our office will just keep a copy of the sponsor's written policy about that. And so we're not going to keep you from proposing it or keep you from applying to it. But absent a sponsor's written policy, we're going to insist on the 38% being built into your budget. So I know that the indirect costing can be a little bit of a confusing piece of a budget. So if you've got questions on that, you can throw it in the chat, or you can reach out to us afterward, or just when you get to that point of needing to budget, and we can sit down and talk through it in more detail. And then the last bullet there, just echoing that sponsors really usually have their own kind of bulleted guidelines on what's allowable for their program. And so let that be your guide primarily, because just because we've said it's okay for you to budget travel doesn't mean that the sponsor's program wants to fund travel. So we'll always be mindful of what's written in the RFP or the request for proposals. And then this is just a little snapshot of the internal budget template that we use. We have some notes here at the bottom. Everything articulates, it's beautiful. So the grant and contract administrators in our office can really help you take your ideas and put them into this format so that we can get some numbers to it. And regardless of what template the sponsor is looking for you to submit, we almost always recommend getting a detailed internal budget together. One, to make sure we don't overlook anything that you might really need to have in your budget. And two, it just helps us with cost accounting to make sure that you know, we're proposing something accurately. Okay, so going back to the PREF, the Proposal Review and Endorsement Form, what triggers us to start on this form would be once we get that budget finalized and we have a little bit of an abstract from you, we're going to pre-populate this form, send it to you to have a look to make sure everything we're writing in there is accurate. And then you will sign it as a student, and you will have to get, like I said, your faculty member to sign off, your unit leader, and your college dean. And again, if your budget stays the same, the scope of your project stays the same, we only need one of these per project. If anything changes, then you need to let us know, and we need to get a new PREF circulated. And again, that's just to make sure everybody's on the same page. And if you originally said, hey, I'm going to do this project for 6 months and I'm only going to these 2 field sites, and we get that approved, and then you come back and say, just kidding, it's now a 3-year project and I'm going all across the state, that's obviously a different project than you said you were going to do originally. So, so we'll just need to check back in with those key players to make sure that everybody is supportive of what it is you're trying to get out there and do. Okay, so financial conflict of interest, the important things to remember on this one, your project title has to match that pref exactly. And this is for our record keeping, for making sure that the thing that you're disclosing, we know exactly what project it's tied to. You know, if you wind up putting a really long title on your pref and then a short title, an abbreviated title or an acronym here, we don't have a way, you know, 3 years from now to go back in the records and we're looking to figure out where did this one belong or what is it tied to. So we need to make sure those things match exactly. Also on these forms, it needs to be a real signature or an official Adobe Digital ID. We so often get people who just want to put a typeface in here. That's not going to work. We need to know that you actually read it, you actually disclosed with you, it wasn't your neighbor, your faculty member doing it for you, your buddy. We need to know that you've actually read this and completed it. And the last checkpoint here is that just guidance on where to put your name versus your advisor's name. Okay, so once we get all the internal stuff sorted out and we're ready to go, our office is the one authorized through a delegated authority all the way from 4th floor Carter, so from the president down to vice presidents down to us, to be the ones to certify and submit proposals on behalf of the university. Now, some sponsors might require that the student is the one that is submitting. We can be somewhat flexible with that. So an example would be if you are part of a professional organization and you can only access the application through your own unique login credentials, we're not going to give you a hard time about that. But the thing to remember is all the internal approvals and your documents, everything must be fully completed, vetted, approved days prior to the time you're trying to submit. We will give you the green light to do it on your own if that's what the sponsor requires, but we've got to have it documented that all that internal stuff was ready to go before that submission time. And in those cases, we're going to request that you take screenshots or you have some sort of documentation that you can return to us of that submitted proposal timestamp so we know, you know, when it went and who it went to. Now, if we submit it, we will collect that ourselves, so you're off the hook. But I like to mention that because some of those portals, the individual screen may not save. So if you, I always recommend if there's 4 or 5 different pages you have to complete, screenshot each of them as you're completing them. Some of the sponsors are really nice about spitting out a compiled PDF at the end that you can save, which is nice, but not always the case. Sometimes you get to the end and it just says, thanks for submitting. And then you're like, oh no, I have no record of what I even typed. So, so do yourself a favor and screenshot along the way, just to make sure that you're capturing what was actually sent to the sponsor in case we ever have to call it back up for an audit. Okay, there are some cases where the award might be made to the student directly. That's allowed to happen, but we want to give you some things, some pointers, and some sort of beware items. Your faculty member needs to be aware of what you're doing. So they need to know if you're using UNC facilities and resources for the project, because technically the award is not going to UNC. So you as a are leveraging resources that really the sponsor is not paying for. So you'll need to have that conversation with your advisor. And all your compliance stuff is still going to apply. So just because you received a $2,000 check made out to your name doesn't mean you can just come to UNC and skip the IRB work and just start doing human subjects or animal research without going through the hoops. You still need to have those checks in place, the approvals in place, regardless of the money sits. Also, it could be taxable income to you. So, you know, I'm not a tax professional. I'm not giving you tax advice, but if you receive a check directly to you, you might also be getting a tax statement from that sponsor come tax time. And so whenever you're given the opportunity to choose whether money is coming to you as an individual or to the institution, I always strongly recommend having it come to the institution so that there's a buffer between you and the tax implications. Obviously, if you're getting paid a hourly rate through your grant award, that is still taxable income. But if, for example, you have an award that's $5,000 and what you're doing is paying human subjects for, you know, survey purposes, or you're buying a bunch of equipment, that stuff is research supplies. It's not money in your pocket. And so you don't really want to give yourself that tax liability if you don't have to. Again, not an official tax opinion, just throwing it out there for your consideration. You might want to talk to your own CPA about it and decide what's best for you. And last one, the crowdfunding is getting increasingly popular, but UNC is a little bit still in dark ages on that. So I'll just tell you up front that platforms like GoFundMe or Experiment are not really compatible with getting those funds from those platforms over to UNC. Again, not to say you can't use them, it's just you won't be able to leverage some of the resources like through our purchasing department, because the funds will be with you rather than the institution. So if you're doing any of that, if you want to do any of the micro donation stuff, you really should reach out to UNC Foundation because they will have the guidance on sort of what exists through online sourcing that we can actually administer. Okay, I think this might be my last one before I turn it over to Nicole. So when you do get an award, you're not done. So there is monitoring that you need to do. You'll want to make sure that you are staying on task. So you don't want to tell someone that you're going to be doing, you know, project X, and then it turns out that you change your mind and you think project Y sounds cooler. The money is not your money. The money belongs to the sponsor, belongs to the university. You're expected to be delivering on what you proposed. And so if things change, there might be decision points in your project where you can't go a certain direction any further as you proposed. Sometimes that's just a conversation with the sponsor to say, look, direction changed. Can we proceed in a different direction? And that conversation comes through our office. We will help broker that to get you the approvals you need to keep working, or figure out, you know, what the game plan will be if you get a no from the sponsor. Again, compliance stuff, sometimes not one and done. So you need to make sure your approvals stay current, especially if you have like a multi-year project. You know, if you have an IRB approval for human subjects research for, you know, like I said, doing a survey, and then it turns out you all of a sudden want to draw blood, that's not, you've got to start over. So that's not in the scope of what is approved. So it's very important to stay in your lane and keep your stuff current. Make sure you know what the sponsor's expectations are for reporting. So you might have technical reports that say, that's just fancy for progress report. You know, what have you been doing in a certain time period? If it's a financial report, our office is happy to help with that, to make sure that you're reporting accurately what you've spent, what might be encumbered, how much balance you have left. And it will always be a good idea to be monitoring your expenditures all along the way. And your faculty member can help you with this as well. You can turn to our office. We can show you what reports you need to monitor that. You want to make sure you're spending as you propose. So again, don't go over your budget and don't start spending in categories that you didn't propose. If you said all you were going to do is travel and it turns out you're buying equipment, that's going to be a no-go unless you ask the sponsor first to change the plan. And as far as record keeping, UNC is set to keep everything for 6 years past the end date of the project. You're going to want to keep your actual research results and your source data, I say indefinitely, mainly because you want to be able to furnish it if anybody ever comes to call about, you know, reproducibility. You know, you might need it for your coursework, but definitely the admin and financial stuff, keep for 6 years. We're going to have a record in our office as well, but that's definitely the minimum. Okay, so before we move on to Nicole's part on the compliance side, does anybody have any questions from the things I just shared? Going once, going twice. Just kidding. You can always reach out to Daniel or to either of us at any time, so don't feel pressured now. And we know this is a ton of information, so let it sink in, go through the slides, and we're happy to hear from you after the fact if you need. Okay, so without further ado, let me hand it over to Nicole for compliance.
All right, so I am going to touch on responsible conduct of research, and then also IRB related stuff, which is more my area of expertise. And then IACUC, just animal research, I'll share a little bit of information with you guys. So responsible conduct of research obviously is very important to being an effective scholar and doing things the right way. It's defined as the practice of investigation with integrity. It involves the awareness and application of ethical principles in the performance of all activities that are related to your research and scholarship. So there's 9 core areas of RCR. Through our office, so we handle the animal welfare, which is the IACUC is the committee that goes with that, human subjects research, IRB, conflict of interest, and research misconduct are the 4 major ones that will come through our office. So there are a number of expectations that can come along from your sponsors and from the institution. Both are going to expect that all are conducted in alignment with all the applicable RCR principles. There are a number of sponsors that do require formal training and documentation of requirements. Can vary between your sponsor and what you're doing. But students that are working on any federally funded projects need to be particularly mindful of these requirements and of the training that may be needed. And that's both projects that you're the lead on and also projects that you may just be assisting other faculty members or even your fellow students with. So there's a couple of like main federal sponsors, NSF, NIH. So I'm going to touch on a couple of their requirements just so you guys are aware of them and you can be mindful. When you're working on projects, if you have anything that may be funded by NIH, as well as just working on a project with another faculty member that is funded through these sponsors. So NIH requires that all trainees, fellows, participants, anyone receiving support through any NIH training, training grants, career development grants, research education grants, even their dissertation research grants, you have to go through responsible conduct of research training. In addition, they require that the training gets repeated at least once during your career stage. So that would be once as a PhD student, once as a master's student, I would guess once as an assistant professor, once as an associate professor, and once as a full professor. If you're a postdoc, you got to throw that time frame in there as well. And then that frequency or no less than every 4 years, depending on how things are set up in your career. NSF and other funding agencies also require RCR training for the researchers that are working on the funded project. So ultimately, the PIs are going to be the ones that are responsible for ensuring that everyone on their team is completing all of the training and they have to document that. So if someone asks you to provide proof that you've done that, it's very important that you do provide them with that so they can keep that for their records for any potential audits that could come up. So NIH, their RCR training requirements applied to that long list of types of awards. The research education awards are typically F31s, and the dissertation, and dissertation research awards are 25. So you can see the definition down below: the predoctoral individual national research awards, and then the education research awards. So most of the responsible conduct of research training can be done city programs. It's an online training program that you will find, I would say, if I had to guess, like 90% of institutions probably use it. It's very popular, and they have a number of courses that you can go on there and take. You just have to register, and I'll show you that here in a minute, and take the trainings that are required. But in addition to some of those online courses, you'll also be required to do contact between the trainings, fellows, and scholars and their participating faculty members. And so generally that's 8 hours minimum. That can include like mentoring, walking you through your project, things like that. All right, National Science Foundation, they require all undergraduate students, graduate students, and postdoctoral researchers who receive support to conduct research complete the city RCR training prior to beginning the project. And they do recommend face-to-face instruction or mentoring, but it is not a requirement. And then USDA, very similar. All faculty, undergraduate, graduate students, and postdoctoral researchers and staff that are participating in research projects need to do the city RCR training as well. Okay, and like I mentioned, RCR training include the completion of online training programs, sometimes small group or individual trainings with a faculty member, group discussions of case studies, participation in seminars, and there's a lot of other things that can go along with requirements for that. There are special instances where face-to-face training is a requirement as part of the RCR courses. And if you do find that you need that based on what your sponsor's requirements are, please contact our office and we can facilitate that for you. We don't have standard setup RCR face-to-face courses. We do have some classes that will count for it. In the past, we have also set up a relationship at Colorado State to allow our students and faculty to go there and take their RCR courses as well. So we can work through that with you if you need it. Okay, so for the RCR online training, obviously you must be able to demonstrate that you've done it. The web-based city courses are available to all UNC faculty, students, and staff. You can easily print off your completion records to share with the lead researcher when you need to do that. And you don't have to go in and take like every RCR course that's listed. They're broken down into learner groups based on what your area of discipline is, and you just need to complete one of those. So if you do bench sciences, there's one specifically related to that. I'll show you a list here in just a second, but each course estimated time of completion is around 1.5 hours to 3 hours. So just plan for that, but you can also start it and go back at any time. You don't have to set up 3 hours in one block session. So you can choose between biomedical and life sciences, math and physical sciences, social and behavioral research, research and sponsored program administration, and responsible conduct of research for physical science. Sorry about that. Did you guys lose us too? So regardless of the RCR training that I've been talking about, prior to beginning work on projects that involve human subjects or animal subjects, you also need to complete specific city courses to those two subjects. Likely that is going to be a requirement of your sponsor. If they're requiring RCR, they will also require specific human subjects or animal subjects courses. Right now, We do not have a specific requirement for human subjects training, but I will tell you, if you are not graduating this year, it is more than likely that by the time you get ready to do your proposal, it will be a requirement for graduate students to take human subjects research city training, or sit through a live training, which we're going to be offering as well. In addition, I believe research city training is required for anyone prior to get started with animals as your subjects in your research project. In addition to that, make sure you go through the proper steps to get approval from IRB or IACUC as well. So let's start with some more detailed information about IRB. So all research projects that are conducted at the university by anyone on campus, faculty, students, staff, that involve human subjects must go through approval process here at UNC. So if you're planning to do human subjects research, obviously talking to your faculty would be the first good step. Otherwise, you can always reach out to me, or there are a number of resources on our website, which is unco-edu/research. And from there, you can find a link to IACUC, IRB, RCR, financial conflict of interest, and a lot of information on there to get you started in the direction that you need to go. So ultimately, it is the responsibility of the researchers and their advisor, if they're a student researcher, to make sure that they are doing ethical research. The IRB is there to provide additional reassurance that your participants are being protected. We also are going to be a resource for you in interpreting all the federal guidelines that come along with conducting research with human participants. So the IRB is going to be an extra set of eyes for you. We are going to make sure that the procedures that you've outlined within your methodology are going to inform the subjects of their rights and all the risks that are involved within being a participant. We want to make sure that you've put in place to protect them if it's needed. And we're also going to make sure that there are either direct benefits to the subjects, or if there are not, there's benefits to society in general, and you're not putting them at any risk that's unjustified. So when you have all of your stuff ready and you are ready to submit your application to the IRB, here that is done through irbnet.org. You basically just need to go to the website, create a login, and then you'll create a new project, and it will ask you for all the information related to your project. And there are a number of resources, like I mentioned, on our website, but also within the research library within IRBnet. So there is a cover page that's a requirement to be submitted with your application. You can find that research library forms and templates. It has a narrative in there. We have examples and templates for informed consent or assent that you can use and find within those within that library as well. So here's what the front screen of IRBnet looks like, just so you know that you're in the right place. If you've never registered before, you can click on that new user registration. If you happen to forget your password, you can click there as well. Unfortunately, I cannot directly help you get a new password, but you should be sent a link from there to the email that you registered with. If something happens and that's not working, feel free to contact me and I can contact IRBnet to get that straightened. So a couple things, let me go touch on real quick about registering with IRBnet. Just make sure that you use like your full name. Like, you don't need your middle name, but don't a nickname, or or don't put it like in all lowercase letters. Like, make sure you write your name capital letter first, because the name that you input in there is going to be on all your approval letters and all your documentation. So make sure you do that, and then also use your UNC email address, and then make sure you affiliate yourself with UNC. If you are a master's or PhD student that also has an affiliation with another institution that uses IRB-Net, you can have more than one affiliation set up in your account. And then on our website, the UNC website for the IRB, you can find a link to these instructions. I just want to let you guys know that they're there and that they are pretty detailed steps for walking you through how to submit a new project. All new projects need to be submitted, and anytime you make an amendment or modification to a project that's already been approved, you also need to submit that change through IRB-Net as well. So I'm not going to go into a ton of detail about IRB because you'll likely have to take the city training in the near future, but I want to touch on a couple things, and one of those is levels of review, because the cover sheet is going to ask you to identify what level of review your projects are. So there are 3 levels: exempt, expedited, and full board. Exempt is going to be the lowest level of review. It doesn't mean you're exempt from submitting to the IRB. It means that your project may be exempt from having to meet some of the federal guidelines. So projects that can be categorized as exempt are always going to be projects that have no more than minimal risk. There's 6 exempt categories currently. There will be some changes coming in January that will expand on those. And we'll have some information out closer to that date on all of the changes they're making with the federal rules to get that information out to you guys. Exempt projects will expire after 4 years. Some of the things we typically see are anonymous surveys, interviews with adults that don't talk about anything sensitive, educational related research or observation of public behavior, as long as it doesn't involve children that you're going to interact with. Existing data can fall into an exempt category most of the time as well. Some things that never will meet the exempt regulations are studies that are particularly targeting pregnant women, fetuses, involving research on fetuses, or prisoner research, surveys or interviews that involve children, and also video recording. Currently at UNC does not fall into the exempt level of review. So we will first look to see if it can fit into one of the exempt categories. If not, we'll check the expedited categories. Unfortunately, expedited does not mean that it will be done faster. Exempt projects are reviewed by one of the chairs. Expedited projects are reviewed by a board member and one of the chairs. So the time frame is a little bit longer as far as turnaround goes. Expedited projects have a 1-year expiration, and then at that time, we'll notify you that that's coming up, and you can request a continuing review if you need to, if you're still working on the project. And they are for projects that are no more than minimal risk. So you can see that definition there. It means the probability and magnitude of harm or discomfort is not greater than those that the individual may encounter in their daily life or during the performance of a routine physical or psychological examination or test. Some things that fall into those categories may be things like blood samples. There are specific limits as to how much and how often you can collect blood, moderate exercise, collection of biological specimens. Those are some of the things that we'll see. Or, survey research that there's more risk involved or identify. And then the highest level of review is full board. Those are for projects that involve more than minimal risk. They have a 1-year expiration, and some examples of those can be the blood samples that don't fall into the expedited category, ingesting of substances if you're asking to drink alcohol or take a medication or marijuana, things like that. If there's a safety concern, if you're putting someone in a dangerous situation, or if there's potential that them participating could lead to risks of them being identified for criminal activity, those may be things that would fall under the concern of needing to go to the full board. And then oftentimes, if there's a project where someone can't give informed consent, those projects may have to go to the full board for review as well. So as far as informed consent, I think this is probably one of the most important things to make sure you're doing properly with your project. It's very important to be able to give the individuals that you want to ask to participate the correct information so that they can decide whether or not they want to be a participant. So make sure you provide them all the information that they would need. You're specific about what you're asking them to do, the time frame of how long they would be a participant, you know, like is it a 15-minute survey, or do you want to conduct 3 interviews with them that are each going to take an hour and a half apiece. So be specific about that. If you're going to audio or video record them, make sure you let them know. There's a statement at the very end of the consent form that is a requirement that talks about their participation being voluntary, and that they can contact me if they have any concerns. So always make sure that that is included verbatim on your consent form, and you can find that on any of the templates within IRBnet or on our website. And then, like I mentioned before, we have examples in there for you to use as well. So couple of things I just want to mention that may give you a heads up on the time it takes for a turnaround is if you can address some of these concerns. The ones that I see when the applications first come in of common errors are not doing the required cover sheet. If you are a student researcher, your advisor needs to sign, both you and your advisor need to sign off on your project within IRBnet. So please make sure that you get those signatures. It's simply just typing your name, choosing from a drop-down menu what your role is on the project, and then reading the statement and agreeing to sign. So make sure that you do that. Make sure that you follow the steps outlined in the IRB narrative so that you include all the information that we need, and then that you add that information that I mentioned verbatim to the end of your consent form. And then I did ask our co-chairs who do a lot of the reviews what some of the most common things that they see when they're reviewing that people forget to touch. So within the informed consent, using the terms anonymous as confidential, make sure that you're using the right. Anonymous means that you as the researcher have no way of identifying who the participant is. If you are sitting face-to-face with them and conducting an interview, you cannot promise anonymity. You can only promise that you will keep their information confidential. So just make sure you use the term. Disclose any audio or video, full explanation, like I said, of what you're going to be asking them to do. And if your consent form goes onto more than one page, at the bottom of the page include a little line for them to initial that they've read the entire thing. And then within your methods and procedures, some of the common things that we see not happening or not providing a full description, how an anonymity or confidentiality will be safeguarded, not including specific place where your data is going to be kept and for how long, and who will have access to it. Not describing how, this is for classroom type research, not describing how non-study participants in the class will be kept out of the study and will not be penalized for not choosing to participate. Leaving out descriptions of your procedures that are described in your consent documents or vice versa. So sometimes we'll see something stated in the narrative, but it's not in the consent, or in the consent, but not described in detail within your narrative. So just watch for those things. And for student researchers, for doctoral students, you must have documented approval of IRB and verification of research compliance forms turned into the grad school with your proposal document. If changes are needed to the IRB as your study goes on, like I mentioned before, make sure you submit your amendment or modification. There might be situations where you're having a hard time getting enough participants, so you may need to change your recruitment methods. If you were to change your advisor, for instance, you'll need to update your advisor within IRBNet as well as on your consent form. So those are some examples of things that would need to come to us for approval. If you ever have any questions about whether it needs our attention or not, please don't hesitate to call me. And students, include your approved IRB application and verification form with your completed thesis in the appendices. And I did check with the grad school recently. They would like you to keep IRB approval through the entire length of your project. So until you've defended and you've passed your defense, your IRB approval needs to be up to date. So if you've done a project that's been approved expedited and it's expiring and you haven't defended yet, or you haven't turned in your final dissertation packet to the grad school, make sure that you do the continuing review request so that we can keep your project active. All right, and then our office also handles the animal research. IACUC is overseen by Laura Martin. So to be honest, I don't have a ton of information about IACUC. We do agree that UNC will follow all the federal regulations regarding animal welfare. So there are procedures that are required before you can do animal research. I do know that Laura requires training. You can do it through city, or there may be some individual live options as well. If you want to contact her for more details, her email is listed, and you can also find all this information on the Office of Research website. There's occupational health and safety program for personnel and students working with animals that require some additional training through the EHS website. So make sure you look for those specifics as well. And I know there's some assessment forms that have to be completed and prior to starting your research as well. So Laura is the Director of Compliance and Operations. David Hydock is the IACUC Chair, and Tim Stitt, he is the Manager of the Animal Research Facility. All great resources for you if you are interested in or starting out with the project that you want to include animals in. All right.
So that's all we've got for you. I think we stayed within our allotted time. If there's any questions right now, we're happy to chat with you in real time. Otherwise, you can pass those through Daniel or reach out to either one of us. Check out our website. We're happy to hear from you anytime. Otherwise, for joining us, and we'll make sure to get Daniel these slides so he can get them out to participants. And thanks a bunch.
All right, so are there any last questions? Okay. So thank you to both Nicole and Chira, for this wonderful presentation and for going over all these different resources for you. I also want to thank you all for joining us and sticking with us. I know there was a couple technical difficulties, but I hope that the recording will help. So as to the recording as well, if you did not know that this workshop has been recorded and it will be posted within a week, hopefully, onto our Canvas workshop. So if you have any questions about that, you can contact me at daniel.westerland@unco.edu, or you can contact gspd@unco.edu. But that should be up in the Canvas course by next week. So if you have any questions, feel free to contact us. I hope you all enjoyed the wonderful presentation, and I hope you have a great day. I'm going to go ahead and end the meeting.